Chapter 56, The Last Obstacle. The city didn't welcome us back with open arms. It welcomed us with a cold, metallic stare. We stood on the balcony of the Sterling Blackwood Tower, the 90th floor, watching the morning fog roll off the East River. Below us, the city was waking up, a relentless machine that didn't care about the fires we had put out or the truths we had revealed. Manhattan has a short memory for heroism, but a long one for scandal. I was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray suit, a mirror to the one Alexander wore the night we met. My hair was tied back in a low, efficient bun. On the desk behind me sat a thick, red folder embossed with the seal of the Global Medical Ethics Board, GMEB. It was the last obstacle. "They're not just auditing us, Alexander," I said, my voice echoing in the vast, open space of the office. "They're trying to strip the foundation of its operating license. They're claiming that because the Factor 4 bridge was developed during the locked-in era, it's legally and ethically compromised. They want to seize the servers and put the mapping algorithm under a 5-year moratorium." Alexander was standing by the glass, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't wearing a tie and his top button was undone, but the Titan was still there, simmering beneath the surface. He turned to look at me, and I saw the shadow in his eyes, the old fear that his name would always be a poison to my science. "It's not about the ethics, Maya," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "It's about the board members who lost money when you made the code public. They can't sue you for the patents anymore, so they're using the GMEB to bury the project in red tape until we go bankrupt." "We're not going bankrupt," I snapped, the sterling fire flaring in my chest. "We have the UN backing, and the Zurich clinic is seeing a 90% recovery rate. The UN is political, the GMEB is procedural, and procedures can be weaponized." Alexander walked toward me, his presence filling the room. He stopped at the edge of the desk, looking down at the red folder. "There's one person who can stop this, the chairperson of the GMEB, Dr. Helena Vane." I froze, Vane as in Julian's sister. "His estranged sister," Alexander corrected. "She's spent her life trying to distance herself from the family name by being the most rigid, incorruptible ethicist in the world. She hates me, Maya. She sees the Blackwood name and thinks of everything her brother became. To her, I am the original sin." I sat down in the oak chair, the weight of the obstacle finally settling in. "And she's the one who has to sign the license. She's the one who can veto the moratorium, but she won't even take my calls." Alexander leaned over the desk, his eyes searching mine. "This is the last wall, Maya. If we don't break it, the Sterling Revolution ends before the first public clinic opens." Alexander POV. I watched the light dim in Maya's eyes, and it felt like a knife to the gut. I was the obstacle. It didn't matter that I had resigned. It didn't matter that I had given it all away. In the eyes of the world, and especially Helena Vane, I was still the man who had written the locked-in contract. I was the steward who had turned a woman's soul into an asset. As long as I was standing beside Maya, I was the reason the world would never fully trust her. "I should leave," I whispered. Maya looked up, her brow furrowed. "What?" "The foundation, the city, maybe even the marriage." I walked to the window, unable to look at her. "Helena Vane is holding the science hostage because of me. If I'm not in the picture, if there is no Blackwood in the Sterling Blackwood group, she has no grounds for a moratorium. I am the liability, Maya. I always have been." I heard the chair scrape against the floor. A second later, I felt a hand on my arm, a touch so fierce it burned through my blazer. "Don't you dare," Maya hissed. I turned to face her. She was vibrating with rage, not the cold, calculated rage of a CEO, but the raw, unyielding fury of the woman who had saved me on the mountain. "You think you're being a martyr, Alexander. You think you're protecting me again." She poked a finger into my chest, right over my heart. "I didn't fight through Zurich and Camo and New York just to watch you run away because a vein is being difficult. We are a partnership. Equal ground, remember. If I'm the mind, you're the shield, and I'm not letting my shield walk out the door." "Maya, the project." "The project is nothing without you," she shouted. "If I win this and you're not there to see it, then I've already lost. We face Helena Vane together, tomorrow, at the hearing, and we show her that a Blackwood isn't a taint, he's a transformation." I looked at her, seeing the absolute, terrifying beauty of her resolve. I felt the steward in me surrender once again, not to a crisis, but to the sheer power of her love. "Okay," I rasped, pulling her into my arms. "Together." Maya POV. The night before the hearing was a pressure cooker of tension and unspoken desires. We stayed in the penthouse, no longer our home, but our base of operations until the Hamptons' house was finished. The rooms were empty, the furniture gone, leaving nothing but the echoes of our past and the humming of the servers in the private lab. I was at the terminal rehearsing the ethical defense, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. I kept thinking about the way Alexander had looked at the window, the way he had been willing to lose me just to save my work. It made my skin hum with a restless, protective heat. I stood up and walked into the living room. Alexander was sitting on the floor, leaning against the obsidian pedestal where the Vigil of Justice used to sit. He was staring at the city lights, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Alexander," I said softly. He looked up, and the look in his eyes was so raw, so filled with a hunger for a peace he still didn't think he deserved, that it took my breath away. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said, his voice a low vibration. "The first night, the way I cornered you. I keep waiting for the world to punish me for it, Maya. And I think Helena Vane is the one who's going to do it." I walked over to him and knelt between his legs, my hands finding his waist. "The world isn't a judge, Alexander, and Helena Vane isn't the law. I'm the only one who gets to decide your worth, and right now, you're worth everything." I reached up and took the glass from his hand, setting it on the floor. I began to unbutton his shirt, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't want the consultant. I didn't want the partner. I wanted the man who was afraid of the dark so I could show him that the light was never going to go out. "Maya," he groaned, his hands finding my hips, pulling me flush against him. "We have the hearing tomorrow. You need to sleep." "I don't want sleep," I whispered, leaning in until my lips were brushing his ear. "I want you to remind me why we're fighting for this room in the first place." He didn't need another word. He swept me up and carried me to the bedroom, the one room we had left furnished. The seductive energy of the night was different than the frantic heat of our earlier days. It was a slow, deep, and agonizingly intimate reclamation. In the dark, with the city of Manhattan as a distant, glittering backdrop, we crossed the line again. This wasn't about power or surrender. It was about the last obstacle. It was about Alexander finally realizing that his body and his soul were no longer his to sacrifice. They belonged to us. He touched me with a reverence that made my eyes sting. He kissed the pulse point in my neck, the curve of my hip, the gold band on my finger. Every touch was an acknowledgement that we were no longer locked in by a contract, but by a choice that was stronger than any legal moratorium. As we moved together, the rhythm of our bodies finally finding the peace the world was trying to deny us, I realized the truth. The Blackwood taint wasn't a curse. It was the fire that had forged us. And tomorrow, we were going to use that fire to burn the last wall down. Alexander POV. The hearing room at the GMEB headquarters was a mausoleum of white marble and judgmental silence. Maya and I sat at the petitioner's table, facing a semicircle of 7 judges. In the center sat Helena Vane. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, bird-like features and eyes that were as cold and gray as a winter sea. She didn't look at Maya. She looked at me. "Mr. Blackwood," Helena began, her voice like ice over gravel. "The board has reviewed the Sterling Blackwood Foundation's application. While the science of the Factor 4 bridge is undeniably impressive, the circumstances of its development are problematic." Problematic, Maya said, her voice a clear, ringing bell. "Dr. Vane, the science was developed by my father 30 years ago. I simply refined it." "You refined it while under a contract of coercion, Miss Sterling," Helena countered, finally looking at her. "A contract written by the man sitting next to you. The GMEB cannot sanction a medical breakthrough that is a product of human rights violations. To do so would set a precedent that brilliance excuses brutality." The room went silent. The obstacle was even higher than I had feared. Helena wasn't just looking for red tape, she was looking for a moral execution. "Brutality," I said, standing up. Maya tried to grab my hand, but I stepped forward, putting myself between her and the judges. I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't the Titan. I was the man who had finally run out of secrets. "Dr. Vane," I said, my voice steady and humble, "you're right. The contract I wrote was a product of a man who didn't know how to value a human soul. I used my power to cage a woman's mind, and I used her father's life as collateral. I am the definition of everything your board is meant to prevent." I heard a murmur of shock go around the room. Helena Vane narrowed her eyes, looking for the trap. "But here is the part you aren't seeing," I continued. "Maya Sterling didn't just survive that contract. She dismantled the man who wrote it. She took my empire, she took my name, and she turned a weapon of cognitive control into a cure for the world. If you punish the science to punish me, you aren't protecting human rights. You're ensuring that the next person who tries to find a cure is too afraid to work with anyone who has a past." I turned to look at Maya. She was standing now, her eyes bright with pride. "I am not a victim, Dr. Vane," Maya said, her voice vibrating with power. "I am the owner of this foundation. And Alexander Blackwood isn't a taint. He is the reason I have the resources to give this science away for free. If you want to punish him, sue him. Fine him. Bar him from the boardroom. But don't you dare tell the people dying in Zurich that their cure is a crime because of a piece of paper that was burned weeks ago." Helena Vane looked at me, then at Maya, then back at me. I saw the struggle in her face, the conflict between her hatred for my brother and the undeniable truth of the woman standing beside me. She looked at the red folder for a long, agonizing minute. Then she picked up her pen. "The GMEB will not issue a moratorium," Helena said, her voice sounding tired. "However, as a condition of the license, Alexander Blackwood is permanently barred from holding any executive or advisory position within the Sterling Blackwood Foundation. He will have no access to the labs, no vote on the board, and no financial interest in the patents." She looked me dead in the eye. "You wanted to be a man of service, Alexander. Now we see if you can handle being a shadow." The gavel struck. The last obstacle was cleared, at the cost of the only world I had ever known. Maya POV. We walked out of the GMEB headquarters and into the blinding Manhattan sun. The press was there, but we ignored them. We walked to the car in silence, the weight of the verdict settling between us. Alexander had been barred. He was officially, legally, an outsider to the work we had built together. "I'm sorry," I whispered as the SUV door closed. Alexander looked at me, and to my shock, he was smiling. A real, genuine smile of triumph. "For what?" he asked. "You lost everything. Again, you can't even step foot in the lab, Alexander." "I don't need to step foot in the lab, Maya. I know the person who owns it." He reached over and took my hand, pulling it to his lips. "I'm not a steward anymore, remember. I'm a husband. And I believe my wife has a very busy afternoon of changing the world." "But what will you do?" "I'll be the man who waits for you at the house with the big windows," he said, his voice dropping to a low, warm register. "I'll be the one who makes sure the lights are on and the dinner is ready. And I'll be the one who reminds you every night that the room belongs to you." I leaned over and kissed him, a long, deep, and soul-shaking thank you. The last obstacle hadn't been a wall, it had been the final key. By stripping Alexander of his titles, Helena Vane had unintentionally given him the only thing he ever really wanted, his freedom to just be mine. Alexander POV, midnight. We returned to the Hamptons. The house was dark, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the ocean. Maya was already asleep, her head on my shoulder, her breathing peaceful and deep. I sat on the deck, the Vigil of Justice notebook in my lap. I opened it to the very last page. Under Maya's entry, the final deal, to never look back, I wrote the final line of Chapter 56. The last obstacle, my own shadow, and I've finally stepped out of it. I looked at the gold band on my finger, then at the moon reflecting on the waves. I was Alexander Blackwood. I had no empire. I had no board. I had no room to own. And as I walked back into the house to lie down beside my wife, I realized that I had finally achieved the ultimate victory. I was just a man. And she was just a woman, and that was more than enough. Maya POV, end of Chapter 56. I woke up to the sound of the birds. The sun was rising over the Atlantic, a brilliant, unshielded gold. Alexander was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the light. He looked like the man I had first met, the ruthless billionaire. But as he heard me move, he turned. The expression on his face was one of absolute, unshielded love. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" he asked softly. "It is," I said, "and you know why." "Why?" "Because we're finally, truly free." Alexander walked over to the bed and pulled me into his arms. He kissed me, a long, deep, and rawly honest kiss that tasted of the future. The last obstacle was a memory. The claim was our reality, and as we stepped out onto the beach, the world was ours to explore. Together. Next chapter, Chapter 57, he kneels emotionally.